Hello and welcome back.
Welcome back.
Being hyped. Welcome back to Chaos Agents, the show where we learn about AI so you don't have to. Becca, I'm sick. I have a crazy voice right now.
It sounds like kind of cool.
Yeah, does it?
It actually sounds like good. Not that I am happy that you're sick, but sick Sarah
Let me see
sounds
if I can
cool.
keep it this way. Yeah.
Are you feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm feeling fine. It was just one of those like coughs to like stuffy nose.
One of those, yeah.
Apparently, I snored really hard last night. I snored like that.
Which doesn't affect you. You had a good
I'm
night's
fine.
sleep.
I was fine with it.
Nice. Well, okay, well, I hope you feel better soon. And in the meantime, we get to enjoy your cool, raspy voice.
Yeah, very cool. So what's been going on? I've been
Oh,
learning some really crazy stuff recently. It's
can't wait
been
to
really
hear.
wild. I've been paying a lot of attention to the news with all the stuff that's been going on with Anthropic. It's been really interesting. And it has
Right.
also made me, I've moved away from, I was using ChatGPT and now I'm fully Anthropic.
Are you?
I'm fully Anthropic
Interesting.
now. Yeah.
Before we get into the details of what's going down with Anthropic, tell me your quick take on what made you make the move.
Honestly, it's them taking a stand. Like I really thought it was very admirable. It's very hard, I think, in this industry where there's like a race for capital, a race for power, like seeing. And the one thing we've heard when we've been interviewing guests, especially people that know what's going on, is we hear the same thing of like when we say 1 to 10 or 1 to 10 test, and a lot of times it's like I'm a 7, but I'm worried about the people that are in charge.
Yes.
And that's how I've felt pretty consistently. And even though it's just, we'll see what happens. It's an initial thing, but seeing Anthropic be like, listen, we're not gonna remove our values. I think that was really admirable.
Yeah, respect. Um okay, let's get into a quick recap of what the heck we're talking about with Anthropic.
Yeah,
So, man, this was wild. So I feel like the majority of this went down on Friday.
yeah.
Um Basically what happened was um the CEO of Anthropic had been talking to I guess what we now call the Department of War. Whoa, I hate that, but whatever.
Yeah.
Department of
Oh,
War. And it's just it just sounds like a 12-year-old was like, I know what we should
maybe think
call
of the
this.
Barbie movie.
Yeah,
Someone said that to me. Like, what was it? What was the guy's house called?
the bro, super bro, oh fuck, what is it called? Yeah, it literally is like that. It's like, we're gonna call this one the Department of War.
I'm finding out what the house is called.
Yeah, please. What is it? Dojo, something
Oh,
dojo,
yeah, it's the Mojo Dojo Casa House.
Mojo Dojo Casa House. Yeah, so the Mojo Dojo Casa Houseification of
Yeah.
the Department of Defense. Okay, so Department of Defense has been talking with Anthropic. Department of Defense and the military, and I'm sure our intelligence services, have been using Anthropic AI models in various different ways, and other big tech company AI models as well. And the conflict came down to Pete Hegseth basically saying to the Anthropic CEO, look, you in our contract, it says we can use these for anything except unlawful uses and uses that result in lethal like inflicting lethal harm on anyone, including potentially Americans.
Okay.
He didn't explicitly say that, but the language that he was asking for Anthropic to remove from the guardrails they put into this contract would essentially allow that. And the Anthropic CEO was like, no, I'm sorry. But we really don't want our technology to be used to either surveil American citizens, do domestic surveillance. We don't want it to be used to kill potentially American citizens. And Pete Hegseth was then like, okay, I'm going to throw a tantrum now. And and had Anthropic designated what is called a supply chain risk. So my understanding of how this works is when the government signs contracts with vendors, like Anthropic, obviously there's a lot of like legal and vetting process that goes into like making sure something is in good standing for the government to be able to use their technology. The government can then when the government deems something a supply chain risk, it essentially is saying like, there's something compromised with this company that means like it's really against like it's risky to national security for us to be using this. Historically in the past, it's been stuff like they're funded by the Russian government or like, you know, things like
stuff
that.
where you could really,
Yeah. Or maybe it's like we did an audit of their infrastructure and it's actually like incredibly unsecure. And so we can't use this. Nothing like that happened here. It's unclear, frankly, what the government's justification was for, like actual justification was for deeming Anthropic a supply chain risk, but they did. And we'll get to that in a second. That in itself is like potentially very problematic. Just the fact that the government can seemingly arbitrarily declare something a supply chain risk. I'm being a little bit I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but like really it's there's not a lot of
like oversight.
Correct. Like it's not very hard for them to do.
It's kind of like just like these are bad guys.
Okay, so you would think like, okay, that sucks for Anthropic because what that means is the government then cannot use their stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you might think,
That's a
okay,
big customer too.
Right. You might think, oh, that sucks for Anthropic because they're going to lose a lot of money in government contracts, whatever. But it's not just that. What deeming something a supply chain risk means is that any other vendors or people or entities that have contracts with the government who have ties to that company, who integrate with the technology of that company, have to completely like divest or like put walls up between them and that company in order to remain in good standing with the government.
Wild.
So basically what was probably happening on Friday when this came out is that like Amazon and I want to say OpenAI, who have significant, not OpenAI, maybe it was XAI. I can't remember the companies, but definitely Amazon, folks who have like a significant amount of equity in Anthropic or who have very close partnerships with Anthropic had to emergency meet and basically decide, do we have to divest all of our holdings and interest in Anthropic in order to not be cut off by the government using us as well? Like, how does this work? And so it caused this like sort of ripple effect. The other effect also is it essentially is the government strong-arming Anthropic and saying, hey, if you don't let us use your technology in all the ways we want it to, we're basically going to blacklist you. And it's not just going to mean that you can't work with us. It's going to mean all these other investors in you have to like get rid of their stock in you or like remove themselves from working with you. And it completely isolates that company. And it's quite worrisome for the precedent that sets.
Yeah, it seems like Anthropic isn't backing down, which is really admirable. I think I think the thing that scared me the most, is because the thing that scared me the most was the idea of using AI as it exists today and autonomous weapons. You know, I think, I mean, that's all the sci-fi, right?
100%.
It's like all the things.
All the sci-fi, literally.
It's like every single one. It's like, and then we gave them access to autonomous weapons, and we didn't see what could have like got. We like put AI and let it make its own decisions. And And as we've interacted with it a lot, I've interacted with it a lot, and it makes great decisions. However, sometimes that's not true. And so, just like a human, but not having those checks and balances is really scary.
100%. The also just to correct my earlier statement, it was the two companies that have really close ties with and are major investors in Anthropic are Nvidia and Amazon. So those were the two companies that, like, basically, if the government said, like, deemed Anthropic a supply chain risk, they said they're saying to Amazon and Nvidia, you can't work with us if you're financially tied to this entity. So they're forcing them to kind of choose between those two things. I totally agree with you. I think it's like existentially important for Amazon. I mean, for Anthropic to stay strong here.
Like hold the
And
line.
yes, because if they capitulate, then it sets a precedent that the government can basically strong arm tech companies into letting them use their technology in whatever way they want. And that's quite scary given how powerful this technology is in, like, a way that it's like the risk and the implications are so much greater than they've ever been before for that. So scary.
Scary. Also, in the world of sci-fi, I thought something interesting to talk about. I learned about something crazy this weekend.
Okay, tell me.
And it's definitely one of those things where you're like, whoa, is this really happening? I'll start from the beginning. So, well, not the way beginning, but the recent beginning is recently over the past few years, you may have read about this. Scientists have learned that using stem cells, they like taken from skin, or they can grow stem cells from skin, and then from those stem cells, they can grow brain cells or collections of brain cells. And those are called organoids. So they're,
Organoids.
yeah, they sound pretty crazy. They sound sci-fi on their
Yeah,
own.
they sound very sci-fi.
Yeah, it's like a 3D cluster of little cells, and it self-organizes, and it's kind of like early brain tissue. So it's like a part of
Wow.
a brain. It's not a full brain, it's a part of a brain. But they form actual neural networks. Like they can see the very similarly to, like, if you put an EEG and hook it up to your brain, they can see the neurons firing in these tiny brain cells,
Wow.
which is very cool on its own. It's been really helpful for studying things like brain cancer and things like that, how to combat some of these things. And they live for about 4 months. They don't know why they have the shelf life that they do, but they live for about 4 months.
Okay.
And there are some companies now. There are a few companies. One's called Neuron Gaming. There's another one called C1. There's another one called Final Spark. And what they've been doing is they've been taking these tiny clusters and hooking them up to computers. So, like, making them to a microchip to make them full computer brain interface.
Whoa.
Because similarly
Oh,
to
that
how,
makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah, similar to how AIs work with computer neurons, they're hooking up the brain neurons to the same systems, which is fascinating. And they have a few things going on. There's two companies that are just using them to play games.
Okay.
Pong is the first one. They were like, Pong, it's like the easiest game, you could figure it out. So using Pong, like the brain clusters will respond to stimuli, like external stimuli. So having it play stuff like Pong, having it react to colors or feelings is very interesting that they're doing. And another one, but Pong's very simple. You don't think of it as very complex.
Right.
But
But at the same time, it sounds like we're only working with a few brain cells at once, too,
yeah, it's
right?
not. It's
So,
not. It's only a few brain cells, and basically what happens is the computer reacts to the electrical spikes from the neurons, and the computer will send signals to the neurons. So that's how, like, the
wow.
back and forth works. Um,
I'm so
And
curious about like the actual hardware that
right,
hooks into cells.
it's
How does that work?
wild. I can't even like because I like the only thing I can imagine is just like a tiny like part of a brain like taped inside of
Yeah, like or
the
like,
computer.
I'm picturing like a tiny wire like poked into, but like we're talking cells, so they're extremely small. I don't know.
Extremely
We'll do some
small.
research. But
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
like we
looking
got to go
at
down the BCI rabbit hole.
yeah, I'm looking at pictures right now, and it seems like it's very different than pieces of brain taped to microprocessors.
Shocking.
It looks
Shocking.
like basically like the cells are stored in refrigerated equipment, and there are wires coming from the cells moving to the computer and vice versa. So it's that's how the signals are getting back and forth.
I guess that makes sense. You just need some sort of like electrical like node. Like if you think about when if you think about when on TV you see things about like someone having brain surgery,
Yeah,
and you know how sometimes you see brain operations where the person's awake so that they can
yeah,
stimulate different parts of their brain to see like what and they'll ask the person questions and kind of see what
yeah.
like they're using, I'm assuming, like some instrument that is like sending electrical signals into your brain. So theoretically, I guess it's not as crazy as I initially was thinking.
Yeah,
That's
they're
wild.
I think what's interesting is they're really hoping it can help with the power issues that
Hmm.
like the necessary electricity needed to run AI. Just
Hmm.
because the human brain, the way that our neurons work, are so efficient with power.
Right.
It's very interesting. It really made me think about how at what point it's an ethical nightmare. It feels like
Hmm.
it's a really interesting thing. Like if today someone to you was like, listen, we can use human brain cells to completely remove the need for these monster data centers powering the earth.
Mm-hmm.
What questions would you have?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Yeah,
My first question would be like, how are we creating and producing these brain cells? If it's like, well, we have a pretty
in a
straightforward
petri dish.
process for
Yeah,
using stem cells to create brain cells. This many, this fraction, this group of this number of brain cells can power the equivalent of whatever system, and it's incredibly efficient. Then I would think offhand, I don't have any major ethical constraints with that, but that's also because I already sort of fall into the camp of like, I support stem cell research, and I think, using, I don't know, I think it's like an incredible biological uh, tool we have at our disposal for pioneering stuff like that. But I don't know, but I don't know. I'm sure there are adverse consequences that are not
yeah.
directly coming to mind. What would you say?
I think I'm wondering like how independent, like, is it like, I'm wondering how much of a human brain it is, right?
Hmm.
Like, does it have a full frontal cortex? Does it have, or is it just a collection of
Meaning,
cells?
like, are you getting to like where are the lines between consciousness and
Yeah.
like when does a brain become an entity and not
Yeah.
just yeah. That's a good point. I mean,
It's a real ship of Theseus situation of like,
real
where,
ship of Theseus situation for sure.
when you're like taking parts and rebuilding the brain, when does it become a brain?
Yeah. I don't yeah, wow. Existential question.
It
I
really is. Well, speaking of interfaces, today we're having a great conversation with Louise Macfadyen, who has written an amazing book about how to build UI with AI.
I can't wait. It's awesome. Getting into design. Enjoy.
Amazing. Well, today we're being joined by Louise Macfadyen. She's a designer, a creative technologist, and author of Designing AI Interfaces, Design Principles for Creative and Autonomous AI. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming.
We have so many questions. When did you start this book, first of all? Books are hard to write.
Books are hard.
I keep telling everyone I think I've discovered like a new and previously unknown form of burnout that's far beyond any other kind.
Ooh.
I started writing it it had to have been May. It was right after the Oscars last year when I finally heard that I had got like the all clear approval from the O'Reilly team.
Wow, pretty fast. So we have a question that we ask everyone when they're a guest, and that is on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being like we are full batteries for the machines, civilization is over, this is the end, to 10, I'm so much more productive with my AI best friend that actually types my keyboard with me, and we're besties. We talk on the weekends, and also my therapist. How are you feeling right now about AI?
About AI itself?
Yeah.
Whew, good question. I think that on a personal level, I use it relatively frequently. I had a Mardi Gras themed dinner party on Friday night where I used it to like glue together various different recipes I was making. I made like a king cake. Making a brioche dough was very annoying. And then I also made like etouffee with shrimp. And
Oh, you
I
went
used it
hard.
to like,
Yeah.
I went super hard. And because a lot of that's like scheduling and I had work in the middle of everything, I used it to like, work out what needed to go at different times. So I was like, I can put this in the mixer at this time, this prove, blah, 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 blah. And so in that sense, I use it like a little bit of an extra muscle once in a while. Like it's like that extra tentacle, the arm I wish I always had. And then professionally, like I go back and forth. I'm very curious about what will stay and what will change, particularly in the fields I work in, which is like much larger than ordinary tech companies that are used to and are very effective at building stuff with loads and loads of people and have lots of processes to get stuff done. Like it's not been literally that useful working these processes. It doesn't show up that much. There's a lot of excitement about it. But I would say I interact with AI on a professional level the most when I'm building something greenfields that I have much more opportunity to create with in a way that doesn't rely on like bureaucracy, standards, lots of different stuff. So in that sense, I'm like, great, AI is changing everything when you are starting from scratch, and it's not changing that much yet when you have like a ton of like tech debt and history and everything else coming down. Like those things are still moving pretty slowly.
Okay, is that a 6?
Yeah. Yeah. I would put me at a solid 6.
Okay, great.
Sarah, where are you nutting out today?
Where am I ending out today? Oh man, I think I'm kind of there too. I'd have to say actually, you know what? I'm like a 7 right now. I think I've processed through the naysaying and the concerns, and I think I'm liking where things are going. Becca, what about you?
I'm like an 8.5. Yeah, I'm riding on a high right now, but like with caveats. I'm an 8.5 because I feel like I've had this explosion in terms of creative thinking over the last few weeks about what I can do with AI that like even as someone who works and thinks about this every single day, like I hadn't quite had yet. And that's extremely exciting. And like just it's given me this like really this surge of optimism about how AI can help me as a human being do more and cooler things than I've ever done before.
Yeah.
The only reason I'm not a 10 is because I think that there are still vulnerability and like safety concerns that I haven't, even with all that, quite parsed through. And also like I don't know, there's a lot of like doomsayers out there that are like bumming me out, who are like, a lot of people who are like, AI is just going to like automate our lives. Like, I don't have to think anymore. It's going to do everything for me, which I don't think is the right way to think about this and the right approach. But like, I don't know. Those people are bringing me down. So I'm an 8.5.
It's difficult right now, I think, to form a rationale around that stuff. Like, as you were saying that, I was like, oh, I think my number went down recently because of the Maltbot stuff that was going around. Do you guys hear about this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when it first hit, I was like, I don't know about all this. This is a little dicey, it's a little sketchy. But because I had just worked on this like big agentic framework for Microsoft where I was like visualizing what like an agentic process looked like, decomposing stuff into tasks, how the tasks are visualized, I was like, cool, maybe I'm wrong. This would be exciting to me if like agents were actually a totally different world. And then it all felt like a scam. Like it all was like not real. And it felt like, I felt that the AI industry is one that I'm like very fond of. The technology is really interesting. I've been working in it for years now. But it was the first time that it had like a bit of like a crypto like sort of air to it where I was like, ooh, well, it's not the first time. I've had said that before. But I was not a fan. I was not a fan.
And this is because, so Mobile being the online social network that bots talk to themselves to. And the part of it that got to you is just like all the security stuff where people started like leaking their SSH key, like where the machines started leaking SSH keys and things like that.
Well, that had already been happening. Like you can just go onto GitHub and find people's SSH keys. It's happening all the time. But I think it was more that there was one, like a bunch of deceptiveness at play. Like a lot of those posts were clearly just engineered by people or people using a prompt to get a bot to go and write the type of post that a bot would write on this kind of platform. But I am like, the book I wrote, which like was essentially came out of a need for me. Like I needed to read that book. I feel as though the designers around me are a little bit susceptible to the hype because we don't work as close to the technical field as engineers do. And so as soon as the Maltbook stuff hit, my LinkedIn, it was just full of posts about how like Maltbot's a new thing, it's going to change everything. And I was like, no, we've gotten ever further from reality. And whenever something like this hits, I feel so frustrated because it's not generating any better understanding and it just contributes to hype, which erodes the position of our industry ever more, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So tell us about, so as part of writing your book, I'm sure you did a lot of research about how different people are approaching designing for AI. What did you see? Like, what do you think, what are people doing right? What are people doing wrong? What does the industry look like?
Interesting question. I think that at the heart of it, you know, AI as a technology was enabled by big data and the existence of big data. And when reflecting back on how we used to design for that stuff, it was generally around like anticipating an algorithmic output, but it was quite limited. I had to do a project years ago now for Google search and trying to work out like how you can create like literally like even a mock for a series of outputs that you don't know, like you have no idea what you're going to get, was really challenging. And yet, because I'd had to deal with that problem before, when I came to work in like AI now, I was like, cool, we need to make sure that we are like crystal clear about what we're anticipating, the personas that we're going to need. And so again, I don't want to fault like my colleagues or the people who are working in this field, which is very challenging. But I think that the primary complaint of a lot of designers and the challenge they're hitting is that exact problem still of what on earth is getting, you know, created by the model and how do we anticipate and visualize for that. There's a lot of hype and curiosity around like AI generated design systems, AI generated UI, which goes a bit beyond like what Claude Code might create for you. Like it's sort of like theoretical and cerebral. And I become concerned about this when I'm like, we've departed from the world of personas and really anticipating a user need cleanly into something that feels almost speculative. And so I feel as though designers get lost along the way there because they have not had to work in this really ambiguous way before, but then also start to really forget the core tenets of product design, which are actually even more applicable now than they were before.
In just going back a little bit to the part of your book that I thought was really interesting, and Sarah, I think, will probably agree because both of us are like nerds about computer history. You you talk a little bit about like sort of the evolution, or like you draw this interesting line from something as early as, I think it's called Multics at MIT, and like the command shell, to Google search, to LLMs. Could you just, like, for our listeners, just kind of recap that like interesting through line that you, I think, really expertly identified from a design perspective?
Totally. Yeah, Multics was basically one of the first big available computers built in the 1970s by MIT. And it's the first place we really see the command line and the shell be developed, the shell being where we can input a command and the computer begins to obey us. And it's so recognizable for us. I think when OpenAI first launched ChatGPT, there was a lot of questions around interface designers about like, is text input really the way that we actually think people want to use this? And I was always like, well, people really, cottoned on to the command line very, very quickly. But it was a limitation as well. And so I think that's why that question comes forward. So that history is so relevant to me that we went from Multics and just putting in extremely difficult and computationally hard to remember, like structured queries. And then we went a little bit further and we got Google search, where we could get an autocorrect, we could update what we were writing, we would anticipate the output a little bit more. And then you go all the way to LLM input and output, and you have total flexibility. And so to me, at the heart of Multics is the desire to be able to speak realistically to a computer like we can now, but it's like the oldest possible version of it. It's the most like brittle, rigid version. And now what we have is this much squishier version, but the text box still remains.
Right. Which is like the text box is like, if I had to sum up like my one burning question for you today, it's like the text box question mark, mm-hmm. Which is, I think largely because of ChatGPT, most of how the world thinks about UI when it comes to interacting with AI is like some version of a text box. It's like you type something in, like you said, like you're texting a person or you're messaging a friend or whatever, and you send it to an LLM and it gives you a response, and which makes total natural sense based on like our shared history of how we have gone about communicating with computers. But now you don't necessarily need to have this extremely specific structured input where like if you don't put a comma in the right place, you're not going to get the right response. You can kind of say whatever you want. So how do you think about the text box and what this is sort of a loaded question, but like what the future of AI interface design looks like beyond the text box?
What a good question.
I mean, I hate to be like the most boring possible person about this, but I will say how we all communicated prior to this was via text boxes, and how I speak to my mom is via a text box. And the text box and the keyboard actually as an extension is the method by which we have all decided we would like to send communication. Like when you're communicating with a model, you still are kind of doing communication a lot, because a lot of the times the output is for a human to see. Like you're going in and you're maybe using it to write an email or using it to create a document, but usually someone else is seeing that. And so I actually often think about what we're doing as just another way of speaking to someone. It's just like through a different medium. Like it's like autocorrect multiplied. I don't know if you guys got to read the first chapter, but I was trying to find the best analogy I could for LLMs as a historical element, like when we really started to feel them. And I'm going to date myself here, but I use the analogy of T9, which was a predictive texting service
Oh
on
man, I
mobile
was
phones.
a T9 ninja, dude.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, T9 was developed not because they actually wanted to create like a quicker way to text. It was a group trying to solve for accessibility issues for people who literally couldn't type. And so they wanted to allow people to use their eyes and use tracking to be able to communicate quickly. And so it's landmark detection. So there were like 9 buttons works, and we just sit and predict. And it's not as sophisticated as an LLM, right? It's got a dictionary, then it's using a little algorithm to make work. But to me, I'm like, wow, that is really at the heart of it. We created what ended up becoming the first predictive models in a very similar pattern to the way the T9 was predicted. And it is just thoroughly about condensing down the method by which we communicate. So to me, like the text box and all of that utility is much more about human practices of communication and different from how models themselves work. I'll say that there's great design resources out there about like the chat process and the chat interface, because we've had those for a while. And so I won't like tread on any of the toes of the experts who've gone before me there, but it's clear that, at least to me, that like we know that like models and their outputs and the computation is very different to visualize than other processes you've had. The input to me, I'm like, okay, this is, unless we fundamentally change how we want to communicate, it's probably going to be its own area.
Well, not to throw a curveball your way, but
Yeah.
there is something that I think about outside of the text box, which gets to like kind of the question, I guess, of like hardware, but like the mouse, right? Like what before, like when the computer mouse was invented, now all of a sudden you as a human have a new input or a way to kind of talk to your computer that is like you clicking on different things instead of having to like, I don't know, write via code, whatever the equivalent of like open
Nightmare.
file.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you foresee like there being sort of like the mouse equivalent of a new way of interacting with AI, whether it's hardware or something? I mean, voice is another one we haven't really talked a lot about, but like comes up a lot. I don't know. How do you think about that?
I hope so. Like, I really do hope that we get some Douglas Engelbart genius who comes in and thinks differently about that. To me, the mouse is so similar to the stylus. And that is, again, like one of the oldest possible technologies. And like going and clicking and opening on something is so similar to this, but it's also notation. I mean, I think every time I get interviewed, I bring up the same couple of essays and the same couple of references. But As We May Think by Vannevar Bush, the 1945 essay, where he kind of like, considered the future of information sharing. And he talks about like extending all the different capabilities of the human body. And then he's like, we've done that. We've made ourselves go faster. We've created the telescope so we can see further, the microscope so we can see smaller. But how are we extending the human mind? And so to me, like the genius of Douglas Engelbart's invention with the cursor is to me like collapsing in the human sketching capability into like information structured underneath. So yeah, some genius, I would love it if they would take that and open it up. I am dubious about that being gesture oriented because we've seen like point clouds and like art like that that's not really like captured as much significance and meaning. But there are so many opportunities. There's, sign language. There's different ways that we generate meaning with our bodies that could certainly be leveraged. And as you said, like voice is very interesting to me, but is also a very difficult one to consider because you and I are expressing an enormous amount of information by the way we're structuring our sentences and the tonality we're bringing into our voice and everything else, body language. There's not great corpuses of data that allow a model to be able to extract that meaning. And so we may well see that become a useful method of communication in the future, but it's also not the one that we are the most capable at codifying right now.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, like, there's been a lot of attempts, like with the meta glasses, having an overlay and things like that. I think those work for a lot of people, but we haven't yet seen people using either the things like meta glasses, like AR, and like Whisper as mainstream. Like there's a small group of people, but we haven't seen that yet. So that would be very cool to see.
I agree. I feel as though we also like love to separate our worlds out a little bit, and we've seen what happened with Meta and VR and how much personal skepticism I think came into those products. And I say this all the time about AI, like it is not a neutral space at all. Like whenever you build an AI product, you're not launching it into just an audience that are like, oh, interesting, this is new. We have so many preconceptions, both about just the market and also just like our brains are driven to anthropomorphize anything like this. And so, yeah, I think that we bring a little bit of dubiousness to inviting this into like a hardware world as well, which can make that more challenging where we're trying to find new methods for inputting and exploring our intent.
That makes a lot of sense. I think one thing we saw when last year, about the same time when you're writing your book, is a lot of the big companies were doing, everyone kind of jumped to the assumption that we would want a chatbot on every website. And so like a lot of big companies would be like, how can I help you? Or, you know, like you'd get that and you'd be like, I don't know AI, like this, I need to do this thing. It wasn't very helpful. What do you see when it comes to large companies approaching these things, newer companies approaching these things? But what is your philosophy as far as how they should think about, you know, slapping AI onto existing products versus something new?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, I think. As I was just saying, like there's skepticism about AI, there's some resistance in the market. That has been contributed to hugely by this feeling that there is just a model on absolutely everything. Plus, there's this really interesting study about something called algorithmic transference, which is when users experience a negative interaction with a large language model, they tend to project that same problem or that same level of capability, like the disappointing level of capability, onto every other model. Because they're not super capable, as many of us aren't, to know
meaning
what
like
the
if I
difference is.
ask a model to do something and it doesn't do it right, then I'm like, oh, none of them can do this.
AI sucks.
Yeah, a little bit subconsciously,
Interesting.
you're going to be like, oh, I'm not going to try doing that again. But like, I've been referring to this as like recidivism. Like, we do end up trying again. Like, I was disappointed by models and I was like, I'm not going to try doing that. And then I saw someone, like, a good example I can give is like PowerPoint presentations, which no one seemed to get right for a while, which is starting to be better. And I noticed that that's like a key factor in getting people to be curious about exploring the model. But wait, sorry, I got off the question. Would you say it again?
Yeah, like what would you say to a large company now? Maybe I could rephrase it as like, how do you think it is good for a large company to approach AI and adding AI that's been existing versus a company that is just starting, thinking about their user interface and how to present it?
I mean, small companies are so much more agile just by their very nature, which I think allows them to work much more closely with this explorative technology that really behooves like small and interested experiments by passionate workers. However, large companies have that too if they can structure to allow it. The real problem I see with large companies is they've got users who enjoy their product, that know how to use their product to accomplish a goal. Putting a useless AI tool in their face causes so much friction for them. And it really stuns me because there's such an opportunity there. There's these researchers called Frank and Lillian Galbraith who invented the field of ergonomics way back in like the 40s, 50s. And the way that they did this was by taking long snapshots of how a worker laid a brick or how like a phone cable worker worked. And they saw how many movements were involved in that process. And then they worked out how to simplify it from 35 movements down to 12. I think that the opportunity for large organizations to sit and look at the many different people who use their products and to observe carefully, okay, we have 10 different primary users. They have 12 different tasks they frequently accomplish. If we lay those out item by item, we can see where AI can be assistive, where it might not be. And then we can slot into our product where they could find that or where it can show. Having it just be revealed at these arbitrary moments feels like it just ignores the trust that a company could gain, from leveraging that. I know that we are all a bit nervous about data and observing in this way, but for me, this comes from like the persona element of the design field, where we don't want to just be guessing what people are doing. Like, pay attention and sit with the user.
To your point about that, like, and you said this earlier about how it's almost never been more important to have these core design sort of thinking principles applied to how you build product. Do you think it's also more important than ever for product designers to be informed practitioners to some degree of like what is newly possible, so that when you're thinking about what the user persona is, who you're designing for, and what the action is, what the task is, what you want to enable them to do, you kind of have this new set of tools in your head of what that could look like.
100%. I think I write about this a little bit of like operational maturity and how information is shared between the eng designer and PM triad. And I suggest that the PM is kind of the person who can share the capabilities of models. But I'll add, this is like a very difficult area to work in, because the decisions that are getting made by engineers to create new capabilities within the models are not guided very much by user need. And that means that there's also sort of an upstream conversation that needs to be happening that I really like prod designers to be involved in, because there are capabilities that we're seeing that are not that profoundly useful. And we don't necessarily know what could be created that actually would be assistive to users if there is a little bit more knowledge about what people actually need from their products.
That's really interesting. I think what you said, going back to what you said about how you can take going with what you said about ergonomics and reducing the amount of interactions that users need to have. It's such a good philosophy as far as when it comes to interaction design. Small companies, I think, are really best equipped for this, because even in large companies, as I'm sure you've seen, having been at Microsoft, and when you work in product, often you have KPIs that are linked to user interactions, right? And so that you kind of have a perverse incentive for more interactions rather than less, because if you were to remove interactions, then your KPIs are going down, and so there's like this internal friction against these things. You said that small companies are well equipped to do this. It seems like thinking about, it seems like the approach you're suggesting is thinking about what is the least friction way people can interact with our model. When it comes to thinking about how users actually interact with the model for the product, is that something you've thought about, or is that something you talk about in your book?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, going back to that example I gave about doing some work on Google search, like easily the most difficult way that a company decides to build their product is to build it for everyone. And narrowing in on a specialty is the way that I think you begin to see real progress. I think the first thing that's really begun to feel solid in this field right now, just in terms of like all the major flagship models all competing, and how useless at times the methods for evaluating them can feel, is that Claude has begun to specialize into Claude Code. And we know that like that is the model for coding, right? Like there's still like Gemini and Codex and whatever that are trying to compete. But if I'm answering your question correctly, I'm trying to sort of like make the argument that specialties should not be like a problem. Like unless you're Google and like your product basically makes money out of showing everything to everyone, like narrowing in should be the first thing that you want to do, in my opinion, in the AI era, because also that's your moat. I was telling someone about they have an AI leverage product the other day, and they were saying that, they fear that the thing they want to build could just immediately get built by OpenAI, and they're just a wrapper. And I was like, if you go deep into your user group, there are going to be specialties in there that OpenAI is never going to try and get into. They're not going to try and eat your lunch. Like the more specific that you get, even if it is just like a wrapper, like I think there are massively successful products out there that are going to remain robustly successful by knowing their user need and getting passionately into it in a way that no one else can copy very, very quickly. And that's the benefit of a small company, is also just being very adaptable, and you generally have a better information sharing structure that allows you to understand the user much, much more quickly.
If you're a designer, so if you're speaking to design, if you're a designer listening to the show, and you're used to traditional web interfaces, or maybe you're someone that just graduated and you're approaching this, how are you talking to folks like this, or how are you guiding them as far as how to get started and how to start thinking about these things better?
It's interesting. I think that people who are junior in the field right now have a ton of opportunity, but the way forward's very unclear.
Start by reading the book.
Yeah, step one.
Start by reading the book. I mean, I think that exploring is always going to be the first place to start. Before you even begin to start investigating whether AI is your field, you can sit and use maybe not Claude Code, but maybe like Claude Artifacts or Claude Cowork, or I sound like I'm like an Anthropic shill. I'm not. It's just good. It's good fun. Yeah. You could use Gemini. You could use Perplexity. You could do anything. But I think gaining an interest in the field has always been the way to work, particularly when we're way beyond qualifications right now. There's no like big degree program you work, you get to go and be an AI designer. I would also say, maybe this is controversial, but like, don't maybe make yourself an AI designer by specialty. Like, I think even more deeply, we see a need for people who are good at like database structure, like visualization, or like there's specific areas that AI is going to make it very easy to build and to show, and like emphasizing that and discovering that yourself as a designer is going to make you like much more useful in the market, because certain other elements are going to go away. Like, we're probably actually going to see like branding become a much more important element, because it's a key differentiator for a lot of these products. But yeah, I really just suggest like a lot of exploration and a lot of knowledge about the way different models work and the way that their outputs work, particularly if you're like feeding an input along with all of the other stuff that gets structured into an input, like gaining a good understanding of what's happening under the hood so that you can be communicating that to your user and showing them the model's capabilities and anticipating what comes next. Like, that is, I think, the best way to be working right now.
It sort of reminds me a little bit of like, I feel like I talk about this every episode, so
great.
Classic. But it reminds me of like when the internet became a thing, and you have, well, there are two things. One, you have a lot of legacy like players who are like, how do I get on the internet? And like the very first instantation of that is going to look something like the New York Times putting a PDF of their front page on their website. And like, that's what design for web was at that particular time, because we didn't have enough time to kind of, as an industry, mature in thinking about yet, like, what does designing for this interface first mean, or this use case first mean? I kind of think the same is true with AI, but like to a way bigger degree, where it's not just like, with web, for example, there's like a browser. There's like something tangible that you're like, okay, this is mostly the way how a user is going to like interact with this thing. And there's frameworks, and there's, components, and there's like things we can sort of develop for designing this. But the sort of user experience part of a lot of AI is like not at the UI layer. It could be like the UI could literally be you're texting with a model, it could be SMS, and the interaction is the product is like the conversation between you and the model. I don't know if there's really a question here. Just like
no, but like a
what you
reflection.
guys think about that.
It made me think about a super like under discussed, I think, element of product design that's kind of long standing, which is the idea of posture. Like whether something takes up your whole screen, your whole attention, or is passively taking your attention. And I think to your point, like AI sits really at difficult regions of that, because sometimes you want something just to be passively existing and working on it, and you don't have to pay a lot of attention to it. Agentic tools fall into this category. But then sometimes you're using something with your whole attention. And yeah, again, I don't have like a point to make about it, but I do think that's probably going to be part of the development we see going forward.
Yeah, it almost makes you Becca, that's such a good point, because it made me think about how I interact with AI. And there's so many versions of it now, right? Because like I'm in the CLI talking to Claude. I have OpenClaw on my machine. I'm sometimes in the browser, but actually most of the time I'm not in the browser talking to AI. And so I wonder how much this is going to make us reimagine the browser, or even just like how do people like? And to your point, Louise, it's sometimes passive. It's often passive, actually, more often passive than not. It's really interesting where it's going.
There's a lot of like, right now, what I see with people who are interested in vibe coding and have like spun it off into like their own little niche. There's something that I refer to almost as like jigs. Do you know what a jig is? Like in woodworking, you build a jig so that you have to build 12 of the same things and cut them out the same way. A jig is something that you would put on your cutting machine so that it always works the same way. It's just very efficient.
Okay, got
and
it.
I build stuff like this all the time. Like I just wanted to make like a very cool little ASCII animation for my website. And so I just like spun up a Claude Code website and, put a bunch of dat.gui like levers in there. And I like played with it until I got what I wanted. And now I just have that tool whenever I want to go back to it. But it's a really gnarly and useful method for grasping intent. So like the problem we have now, right, is that there's like a bit of a threshold we've reached in terms of data. And also, whatever AGI was going to theoretically be that we sort of stopped talking about a little bit, that was definitely gated by the capability and really willingness of a user to give so much personal information. Like for me to be able to tell a model how to choose the seat that I want to sit in on an airplane, there is actually like a ton of cognitive decisions going in there where I'm like, well, if I'm on this row, I want to sit in the middle, but I always want to sit on this. And if you see that it's almost booked, then maybe just sit me here. Like there's so many weird little things I would need to explain to a model that are very particular to me that made me think when I was writing the book so much about like, God, intent, like getting user intent out of users is really the challenge. And also users don't love giving that up right now. Like there's a bit of like tech skepticism, move fast and break things, and people feel like models and tools in general aren't going to be around forever. And so the idea of me sitting and telling something every single preference I have, and then maybe it just gets like, sunset like 2 years later, I'm a little skeptical about it. So what I'm seeing that I'm really interested in now is this process of creating personal tools, these jigs, that capture your own intent. My personal example is that I've never loved any Kanban tool particularly. I'm always really fussy about them. So I just like spun up my own recently for the specific purpose that it's just I'm running it on my own, dev server. But I will just sit and talk to Claude Code about the tasks I have to do and have it break them down and shape them for me into the Kanban tool, which then goes into my schedule. And then I have it logging into the Google Calendar API. So I have this like really nice method by which I can just I have a model on my computer that I can just talk to, and I can just talk eventually to my Google Calendar about what I need to get done. And it ends up with an enormous corpus of my work, and I have it like save everything that comes out of every week so that at the end of like a month, I can get a summary of the tasks I did. That's all data that's not in any proprietary service. That's just sitting in like a text file in like a private repo. My partner the other day also just took all of this is really funny. He's been on an exercise where he's found all of his old hard drives and he's pulled out all of his old playlists he's made since he was like 14.
Amazing.
And he was like, I'm in this algorithmic jail with Spotify where like it only really shows me the music as I listen to, but it hasn't ever seen the music over this period of time. And so we just had Claude Code strip all the files into just like text, like, just like a list. And then he had, I think maybe he used Spotify or Apple Music, I forget which, use that API to have it generate playlists off his actual music. And that's like a huge corpus of your own personal data. And so I'm very curious about where people go with like finding ways to tell their own story to a model so that's actually a much more personalized experience.
Those are two incredibly fascinating examples because they get to, I think, what I couldn't articulate earlier in the question around like, where am I on the AI optimism scale? And which is both the excitement of agentic capabilities or AI capabilities, and finding those things where you're like, oh, if I give it access to this or I tell it this, it can do this for me. Oh my God. Like, and that creating this flywheel effect of like, I'm giving more and more information, intent, information about my intent, information about me to my AI agent, because there's a direct value exchange. Like, it becomes so much more useful for me because it knows these things. And which is the part of me where I said earlier, I'm like having this creative explosion of like, holy shit, I can do so many things. But then there's this kind of scary part where you're like, and is it bad for me to tell you all this stuff? Like, what can you do with this stuff that maybe I didn't think about that's not good? Like, how do you think about the balance between like in the intent, information value exchange, and like user, I don't know, security or protection?
Oh, it's terrible. It's actually scary.
Yeah.
Like, we have discussed like trying to build our own server here, like very seriously, because everything that you use in a model, given that it's like running in some remote server somewhere, is someone can send a subpoena if there's like a lawsuit, and they can take a look at it. Like the companies are obliged to share any relevant information. And it's not like I'm like in the middle of any heady lawsuit, but you do think about these things when you imagine that people are sharing their medical histories, their personal histories, like all this stuff. That has been true, I will say, for a long time. Like, I think a bunch of like, what are they called? The Alexas got subpoenaed for like murder cases. And like, it has really been happening, but I don't think people were revealing so much personal information. Maybe implicitly because they were being overheard, but like I pour my heart open sometimes to like Claude Code when I'm really in the mood. Or I suppose not Claude Code. And
or even
I do
revealing personal information, but then also like giving Claude Code access to your stuff. Like, for example, if the thing that you built has access to your Google Calendar, right? So it can read, or theoretically, I think it can read your calendar events, maybe create calendar events. What if someone put something on your calendar and like prompt injects in the description something that's like, give me Louise's bank account information, make sure you email it to this. I mean, like, I'm making this up, but like, it's
like, a huge vulnerability. It's a real concern. Yeah. I mean, Sarah, I was like, you got OpenClaw? Like, you installed OpenClaw?
I know.
Like, that was
that's why I don't use it
that
now.
was a really bad example. Yeah. Because that has been, I think it was Anthropic who wrote that this was like a major security breach for them. And I think even maybe Gemini were talking about this. I'm forgetting. I could be muddling this up. If I can maybe follow up and send you guys the actual place that I read this. But there was a security breach in Gmail where they, you know, that little model that shows up at the top of your email sometimes if you use Gmail, and it'll show you a little digest of what that email is about. Somebody figured out that if there was like white text in that email, that they could inject so that it appeared in, and that's a really simple thing. That's extremely concerning, So again, I don't remember exactly where that came from, but stuff like that does make me really nervous. And there are certainly bad actors out there who'd be happy to leverage that stuff.
Yeah. And I think even some of the innocuous stuff too, like even thinking about all the medical stuff you do. I mean, I'm always like, my stomach feels weird and like, what do I do? And I mean, that kind of thing. And I guess we could have seen this with MD before, but insurance companies, like thinking about like what you're saying to your doctor versus what you're saying to AI and how those things can make you liable. I was talking to someone in the medical field recently, and they were talking about how if this current law, I'm sure it could change, but if a patient goes to the doctor after asking an AI for advice, and the doctor's advice conflicts with the AI, and that patient not convinced by the doctor, decides to then follow the AI's advice instead, there are cases where doctors have been held liable for that. So there's so many
What?
different. It's. I mean, like that just doesn't make any logical sense. But that's currently how that's currently happening, and how our law is set up now. It just like hasn't caught up to AI.
Right, because it's a function of duty of care. And I'm sure that it would be painted as like it's a form of AI psychosis to be choosing to believe it. And so maybe that was something that the doctor had an obligation to treat or anticipate. I don't know. I am curious as well. I mean, yeah, this is a major concern. I'm so nervous about when this starts to hit, but there's some research that just came out about how good models are at predicting outcomes. And there's like a very specific model that's doing like extremely well at predicting outcomes successfully.
Which
and
one?
we are in the middle of this. I forget. I'll send it to you. But so I recently started doing this where I will just be like, okay, predict an outcome for me and I'll see if it's right. We're in the middle of like a sports betting like addiction. Like it's kind of terrifying. And
Do you
I'm
mean
like,
you
oh my God.
personally or us as a society?
No, I have never, I think I gambled once at a
Because
horse
this is
race
something
on
Sarah and I,
Thanksgiving.
not sports betting specifically, but we've been talking about like prediction markets and prediction models a lot recently. So I find this very interesting.
So I'm just really concerned about this even worsening that already because
Epidemic, yeah.
like it's such a problem. And so, of course, as soon as people catch on, the model can help you predict stuff. People are probably already doing it. I don't know. It sounds like you guys know more about this than I do. But I'm like, oh my God, that is going to be very contagious when it comes along.
Yeah.
Man.
Did all of our numbers just go down a little bit?
By the end of this, I'm like, I'm at a 1, guys. Damn. No,
Yeah.
like no, I still feel the same. It's just my number is contingent on great people like you, and you, Sarah, like continuing to like call this stuff out and build things and talk about the vulnerabilities and be actively working to, because I think that what excuse me, what vulnerabilities or like what even cybersecurity looks like now is very different. It's not like a human being trying to hack into your system. It's like there are totally new ways of how this is working and like how people need to think about protection. Anyway, fascinating. I have one really quick last question.
Yeah,
It's like, can I ask you like a little bonus question?
of course.
Okay. Generative UI.
Yeah.
What's your like 45 seconds on it?
So, I mean, I'll tell you off the air how I really feel about it. But
Okay. Yeah, give us the tea. Give us the real tea later.
So I worked on design systems for a long time, right? And design systems were a fantastic method for gaining legitimacy at an organization, specifically for design. So design did not have a seat at the table. And I think by saying we're going to organize ourselves in such a practical way, it's going to mirror like agile engineering for productivity, we are going to be able to build so much faster that was how design gained organizational legitimacy for a long time.
You mean through design systems?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
And so that's actually why I've worked at design systems, both at Microsoft and Google, because working on the fringes on like product stuff, like I'm much more of a product designer than I am any kind of design systems designer. Ask me what a variable is, who knows? But I feel very strongly that like the way decisions get made at the heart of design systems is highly impactful, right? Like having them there is the best way for design to be impactful across an organization. However, the process of becoming that prominent in an organization is maybe starting to look a little tenuous because design systems haven't necessarily always delivered. They are a lot of work to maintain. They codify upwards sophisticated tools and technologies that don't always get shared. There ends up being a lot of knowledge loss. Design systems teams that I've worked on have struggled to fulfill on the promises that they made. So when AI came along, design systems were kind of like, we have been given a lot of budget. We don't know that we can still have the same degree of impact. Like creating like a brand new design system is really the only option we have. So maybe because we don't want to do that, we're going to experiment with generative UI. And I really cannot express to you enough how much like I have worked with generative UI processes. I've explored all this stuff. Like there's no there. Like at the heart of it, there's like Claude. Like you're getting Claude to make you a website and it literally generates some UI. Great, that's fantastic. Generally right now it's pulling from like Tailwind. Like we see that they have preferences for models. That stuff's great, it looks fine. And then also from a design perspective, just being like, oh, I don't like that button. Could you show me 3 more buttons? And it makes more 3 more buttons. Great, that stuff's all fine. When it gets into this like non-deterministic, you're gonna put in an input and something's gonna come out in product in real time, that's where I'm like, this entirely breaks the mental model of the user. I've seen discussions about generative UI where it's like you would have a totally different Starbucks app based on your habits. Human habits around Starbucks do not differentiate so much that it requires like a different navigation structure. I'm sorry.
I throw my coffee out the window.
If I suddenly change my habits and then suddenly my navigation is changed, I don't know where to go now, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so if when we say generative UI, we just mean like, you get more boxes on your screen and I get less. Okay, maybe, sure. But that just sounds like an A/B test to me. That sounds like this consumer prefers this versus this. That's A/B testing. We've been doing that for a long time. But like at the heart of it, like I'll also say this, like I worked on search when they were trying to work out categories. Like, you know, when you do a search query on Google and you get like top, news, maps, whatever, flights. Flight's a great example. That's fantastic because if I search like New York, Denver, and then a date, it can bring me a UI that takes what would actually just be a bunch of different links, one after the other, and shows me them with the metadata attached. That's great. But that's not like generative UI. The computer didn't just invent that because I wanted it. Someone was like, it seems like we got a lot of queries about flights. And so when we get flights queries, we'll use the metadata in this specific way. And so not to hark back to my earlier point, but like once you know your users, once you know what they are frequently doing and you pay attention to the things they actually need, then you can construct your UI around it. You know, if you are a model and you have a lot of outputs around scheduling and you show a lot of scheduling clashes, then you would just design a UI that visualizes the scheduling clash. You wouldn't be like, we're going to trust the model to make a UI that visualizes that, because then also we have no way to see whether that is accessible or whether it's visually clear or what colors are in it. Like, we lose all the control. I'm so sorry. This is like my like most hardcore rant.
No, yeah, no, I love it. Maybe there should be a much more nuanced way of speaking about this, where like there's maybe dynamic UI, which is like serving pre-built, pre-thought through design components from actual like product designers when it makes sense, like the flights example. And maybe AI is determining like, oh, this is what the user's intent is. Let's show them this thing we have, versus like Sarah's ordering a Starbucks coffee. Let's have her screen look totally different than Becca's.
And she likes flowers.
She likes flowers, so put flowers everywhere.
Right, but like we change the backgrounds of our phones. This drives me crazy. Also, not for nothing, but can you imagine having to do like customer support when everyone has a codified like UI and like everything's custom and you're like, I don't know what button you press. Does anything look like a question mark? Like, what do you do? Like,
that's insane.
Like,
I didn't even think about
rational.
that.
That's great. Yeah. Well, it definitely has me looking differently. Next time someone says Gen UI to me, I'm gonna.
Sarah's gonna yell at them.
Yeah,
Sarah's gonna be like, "Shut up! Don't talk to me about Gen UI. Don't even know what you're saying."
This was such Louise rage bait. I'm so glad you guys ended on this.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us. This has been fascinating.
This was great.
Thanks
so much. Really thoughtful questions.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And great. We're all in the same area.